So we're going to look at, we're looking at our, what can we do with our hazardous materials, right? We talked about the first thing to do is to make less, recycle and reuse what we can't, what we do have, and then if we can't recycle or reuse it, then one of the options was to try to convert it to something that's a little bit less hazardous. And one of those ways was through incineration. It has to happen at really high temperatures, and it can break down those chemicals. A lot of times it's causing a chemical reaction to occur, and then it breaks it down into something that's a little bit less dangerous for us, and that can either be utilized for something else or it can be disposed of. Sometimes we can't put things actually into an incinerator, and so that's where the plasma torch comes in. So this happens usually on site. This can also happen like in an area like this. You could use a plasma torch, but the nice thing about plasma torches is they can be portable, so if you have to take them somewhere, you can. But once again, it's just to increase that temperature really to very high temperatures to break it down. If we can't make it into something that's less hazardous, either through the phytoremediation that we looked at the end of the last video, or through using heat, then we have to figure out a way to dispose of it. So there's surface impoundments, which is what is on the right hand side. A surface impoundment is this is a sedimentation or evaporation pond. A lot of times they're used for pig excrement or for animal excrement. They will pipe it into the sedimentation pond. They'll let the liquid part of it, the water part of it, evaporate out, and then they have the solids that are left behind can be composted down and be used. Obviously, there's some issues with surface impoundments if there's flooding or something like that. The one that's on the left, this picture on the left-hand side, this is deep well disposal. So basically what they do is it's kind of the opposite of taking water out of the ground. This is a concrete encased tube where they pump the hazardous materials down into the tube itself. They're not pumping it down into a reservoir or anything like that underneath the ground. It's staying within that encasement. There's long-term retrievable storage is a place where it's just kind of what it sounds like. So it's a place where they can put the materials, but they can also get to them to check on them and make sure that they're not leaking or something like that. So it's long-term, meaning that we're not going to be taking it out of there for a long period of time. And that's where a lot of our hazardous materials are in a hazardous materials long-term retrievable storage. Secure landfills are a lot like our sanitary landfills. They just have a little bit more to them, but they're not meant to be dug up again. So while the long-term retrievable, it's meant for us to be able to go back into it, the secure landfill is not. This is what the Love Canal was supposed to be, was a secure hazardous waste landfill, and the jury's still kind of out on whether or not it actually is. But you can see that it's set up very similarly to a regular sanitary landfill. You've got the liners in there. You've got this is, instead of being leachate, this is looking for the detection system. So that's how they figure out and make sure that it's safe. It's got the clay cap on it. You can see that they're stacked in there, then they're covered up. So very similar to our sanitary landfills. So we talked a lot about industrial chemicals and things like that. For yourself, we looked at that list of things that are in your household that could be considered hazardous materials. So we look about what can we do personally to reduce the amount of hazardous waste that's being produced or being used. First is always the refuse. If there's something out there that's less harmful that we can use, like if, for example, if you can use vinegar instead of to clean things with. Vinegar actually cleans just as well as most of your commercial cleaners out there. So that kind of stuff, it's trying to use some of the less harmful substances, and then if you do have to use them, is to use them in the smallest amount possible, and then making sure that you're disposing of them correctly, that you're not putting things in the garbage or down the drain that aren't supposed to be. Some other issues that we've had with toxic or hazardous materials, one of them is lead poisoning. Lead, there's two main ways that it got into into humans. One was through lead-based gasoline, so as the gasoline was burned, lead would be in the atmosphere, in the pollution. The other way is through lead pipes. So for the longest time here in the United States, that's what we used in our plumbing systems, not realizing that lead was going to be toxic and that it causes causes blood disorders. It can cause mental retardation in babies. It can cause other kinds of illnesses and things like that. So it's trying to keep that lead out of everything is on the prevention side of things, and then the controlling is really making sure that we're going into some of those places, especially older places, and removing the lead pipe and things like that out of those particular areas. We don't use leaded gasoline anymore, so here in the United States. So we've reduced that issue. Mercury. Sorry, this one kind of screwed off to the side there. We're going to make that just a touch bigger so we can see it. So mercury is a byproduct of burning coal and our fossil fuels, unfortunately. And mercury, when we burn it, it goes up into the atmosphere, and everything that goes up must come down. And so, and since 70% of our planet is water, most of it comes down into the water. And so then it's impacting fish, which then are harvested for food, which then puts it back into our food supply. And so mercury is definitely an issue as far as health is concerned. In areas like Japan, where they eat things that we wouldn't normally eat here, they eat whale and dolphin. They are higher up the food chain, so when we talk about biomagnification, where those toxins magnify, we talked about this a little bit with DDT. Mercury does the same thing, and so when we use those animals as food sources, then we're getting a higher level of those toxins, and mercury does cause birth defects, and some pretty serious ones. And so they're starting to see that in some areas in Japan, where dolphins are part of school lunches and things like that. It can cause problems in kids, not just in unborn babies, but also in people in general. So when we look at how do we prevent some of the mercury problems, part of it is that prevention, of course, is always trying to not put it into the atmosphere, not trying to burn the coal or using energy sources that don't produce mercury as a byproduct. And then on the control side of things, looking at that regulation piece. So are we going to tax it? Are we going to collect it? Are we going to require labels on it? How are we going to make sure that people know that there's mercury in the product, that it gets disposed of properly? Another look at our biomagnification. This is the same kind of thing that we looked at with DDT. The same thing happens with mercury, and that's what this example is showing mercury, that's Hg, being emitted from a coal burning plant, and then it comes down as acid rain. It gets it can either come down as rain or deposition as a solid. It gets into the water supply, and then once again it gets into the plankton, which is eaten by the little fish. Little fish get eaten by the big fish, and then people eat that. And it happens the same way in the oceans, where we might be eating a shark or dolphins or whales. So one of the ways to try to eliminate some of the issues that we've been talking about is that focus on a low waste society. And what that really means is that front of the pipe sort of thing, where instead of trying to take care of a problem after it's already happened, the pipe, remember, being our system, we want to try to keep those toxins out of our system. So, and try to keep those wastes out of our system by using less of those materials. Using less all around will cause us to have a lower waste society. And trying to keep in mind, and this is where the whole last unit of the course will come in, is with environmental justice, is that environmental problems are not equally distributed around the world. They tend to be concentrated in certain areas, and that focus on environmental justice is that a lot of those areas are the poor areas, the people that don't have a voice, and not taking our problems from the first world countries and placing them into third world countries. And so that's something that you're going to focus on during the last whole week of the class. So when we look at some of our call to action and what can we actually do, there's some treaties out there that are looking to reduce some of the chemicals. Persistent organic pollutants is a big category because when you look at it, so it's insoluble in water, which means it stays together in water, and it's soluble in fat, which means that it dissolves basically into your fat and becomes part of the fat in either the animals that are in the ocean or in us when we actually consume those animals. And so we haven't ratified, unfortunately, this treaty, but looking down below, I know there's a lot of chemical names in there, but these are ones that are definitely very dangerous for us. You should recognize DDT. Some of the other ones probably not recognizing quite so much. Over on the right-hand side where it says unintentionally produced byproducts, PCBs, that's a big one that now that a lot of our plastics and things like that they're saying we're keeping out of our plastics. And they're making kind of a big deal about this one. So there's some species that have gone on the endangered species list because of the POPs. Things like the Mediterranean monk seal they have very high concentrations of POPs in their system. So trying to not only look for human health but also for ecosystem health as well. And some of this is once again just remembering that there's no away, just like we were talking about with the Love Canal, is that just because I throw something away, it's going somewhere. And keeping that in mind and at the forefront of what you do with your waste. If I'm going to put it in a can, if I'm going to take what I have and I'm going to put it in a can, am I going to put it in the recycling? Am I going to put it in here? And am I going to choose to use something that doesn't have to go in either one of those places? So there's some of these are just some little one-liners. I like the alliteration in the third bullet about dilution is not always the solution to pollution, meaning that we can't just wash it away. You can't put it down the sink and you can't just put more water in it and cause the problem to go away. Some of these toxins they're toxic in very low concentrations, like mercury. So we have to make sure that we're appropriately dealing with the chemicals that we have created and we're not just trying to dilute them in the ocean or in our waterways.